Hi, hi, everybody. And with me today is Terence Martin, the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, Debbie White, the president of HPAE New Jersey, which is the largest healthcare union in New Jersey, and Jan Hockadell, the president of AFT Connecticut. Um, all of us have been representing workers in this pandemic through thick and thin, and these are three amazing leaders. I want you to hear their stories tonight. We're talking today and tomorrow about Workers' Memorial Day. And in this year of so much pain and so much anguish, honoring the day, honoring workers, honoring who we represent, honoring the work that they have done, and in some instances, they have died as a result of making a difference in the lives of others. And as we honor workers on this International Workers' Memorial Day, which will be tomorrow, and which will start in Groton, Connecticut at 6 o'clock in the morning with a memorial service. And we will be doing another memorial service in Washington, and there will be others as well. As we do that and pray for the dead and honor the dead, we fight for the living, and we fight for safe, equitable workplaces in which our members, the people we serve, and our communities can thrive. We urge all of you to get involved, to share your own stories on social media using, of course, because it is social media, the hashtags as you see below, hashtag Workers' Memorial Day and hashtag IamAFT. Workers' Memorial Day is held on April 28th every year all over the world, with workers and their representatives holding events, demonstrations, visuals, and other actions to mark this day. But it also has so much other meaning this year in light of one of the biggest workplace hazards we've ever had, which is COVID, or certainly in my generation. And in fact, it is the 50th anniversary of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which went into effect in 1970 after the tireless efforts of unions across this nation, including the AFT, to demand that government did something about hazardous workplace exposures, from exposures in meatpacking industries to exposures in healthcare facilities, from things like bloodborne pathogens to things that crumbling buildings that create mold and asbestos and lead in pipes. The goal was the right of every worker to a safe and healthy workplace. So this year we also honor the urgency of that department within the Department of Labor, something that we have seen missing in action in the last several years, and which we hope will change, and we know it will change under President Biden and Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh. Of course, this Workers' Memorial Day is like no other in modern times. We've lost far too many people in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the impacts and effects of it, including over 300 of those who are our members who we know and can account for actually got COVID at work, sacrificing their own health and safety to care for others. You'll see their names scrolling on the screen below. We honor them. We remember them. And as we see their names, let's take a moment of silence. In my religion, we say their memories are a blessing. And they are to all of us who knew them, and to all of us for the work they did, for the hope they brought, for the passion of who they were. And we need not only to remember them, but to fight for the living and for what we all want, which is safe workplaces and conditions in which we can all thrive. Our members, our communities, the people we love, and the people we represent, and the people we work for. Now, obviously, nobody should go to work with a pit in their stomach, worried about whether they'll get sick or injured. Yet in too many hospitals and work sites and schools, that fear is real. And that fear was real before COVID. COVID made it realer in different kinds of ways. But nurses and other hospital staff are punched, spat on, and kicked. Educators are in classrooms riddled with mold and broken windows. Public employees are in facilities with minimal safety protections, despite highly specialized and sensitive work that may go on there. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, 80% of emergency medical workers experience physical violence in their careers. Furthermore, 39% of nurses report verbal assaults each year, and 13% of nurses report physical abuse each year. Think about it. Nurses are there at our bedside to help us, and yet they are sometimes in the front line of people who are so anxious or abusive that they get hurt themselves. Take Kim Ross in Oregon, went back to Canada because she contracted COVID-19 at work, and despite multiple grievances filed by ONA, still had trouble accessing PPE. Or Pat Moon Updike in Wisconsin, who lost her career at the hand of patient violence, which almost destroyed her trachea, and has been dealing with PTSD and other issues since that day. I could go on, and we are very grateful that Representative Joe Courtney has once again introduced and has now gotten passed the bill that would address workplace violence and would make this a regulation within OSHA. Unions have always been the best lines of defense in terms of workplace safety. It's a critical piece of what we negotiate pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. But as more and more of you return, some of you never left in-person working, know that we are doing everything we can to make sure that this is not an either or. It's not whether you're safe or whether you're in person. It's we need to make sure that we are safe and in person. And frankly, as the virus changes, and I think today was one of the most hopeful days of this pandemic when CDC has said, because of so many of us who have gotten vaccinated, we can, if we jog, if we walk outside, we can actually take, and we've been vaccinated, we can actually take off our masks. I love these charts, which I put in the top of my Twitter page of the CDC saying what we can do maskless right now. But as we do that, and as we get vaccinated, and as we actually hopefully start seeing COVID in the rearview mirror, let's remember our working conditions, our patient healing conditions, our kids' learning conditions, our community safety conditions, and we have a right to be safe on the job. So what we want to do now is really two things. One is this call to action for the Workplace Violence Prevention Act, for OSHA to do its job. And tomorrow we will be filing more workplace safety claims to hold employers accountable to make sure that people are safe. But in the meantime, we're also doing what we can to get created and enforced a temporary emergency OSHA standard specifically for COVID and other of these kind of high emergency contagious viruses. So as we do all of these things, as we continue to work with the CDC, like today, to hear what's going on in terms of variances, as we continue to actually demand the guidance that we know people need to keep them safe, I really want to turn to those three leaders that you saw at the beginning of this program, to actually have them talk about the kinds of things that they've seen this year. They've been on the front lines. So first, I'd like to ask Jan Hockadale, the an AFT vice president, as well as the president of AFT Connecticut, a public employee PPC member. Jan taught science at Wright Technical High School, where she was the 2006-07 Teacher of the Year, and at Caner Technical High School in Waterbury, Connecticut. She also served as an after-school supervisor, class advisor, a beginning educator support team mentor, and chemical hygiene officer in her spare time while working as an educator. She was selected by Governor Lamont last year to serve on the state's Reopen Committee, and she has been representing teachers, nurses, public employees, basically 28 hours a day. Yes, I know there's only 24 since this epidemic began. And so let me turn it over to Jan to talk about why safe workplaces are so important.
Thank you, Randy. And thank you for allowing me a few minutes to appreciate the work our sisters and brothers, our state and local public employees do every day. We often hear that no one was more affected by COVID than our healthcare workers or our educators, but there is another group. And because they don't have a single specific job title, but many job classifications, too often they go unappreciated, and that is our AFT members who are public employees. Like our sisters and brothers in education and healthcare, they responded to the community's need for services throughout the pandemic. And most of them did not have the option of working from home. Each day they face their fears for themselves, their families, and the public that they serve. The year-long thanks to our frontline public employees is no less deserved because they have been constant and their work too has been heroic. AFT members throughout the country have served in our prisons, our courts, worked with people on probation, protected and maintained our water supplies, and in numerous state buildings to provide the government services our communities rely on. And these needs increased during the pandemic. When unemployment needs peaked, along with other vital services, it was our members who were there to meet the challenge. Sadly, many of our public employees are designated essential workers, which means that they're required to go to their workplace, even when they could easily work from home. And as a result, hundreds became sick, and some died. AFT Connecticut lost a probation officer from our Judicial Professionals Employee Union, and an office manager and an accountant from our Administrative and Residual Employees Union, or ANR. These members were not merely stories to make a point. They were parents, spouses, colleagues, and friends. They were people who sacrificed their lives by going to work this past year. And when state and local governments identify their employees as essential workers, it also made them ineligible for the expanded sick leave coverage provided by Congress. So they were in double jeopardy situation, especially if they had dependents at home. Most of our states refused to expand the sick leave coverage themselves, and in most cases denied the workers hazard pay. State and local government workers provide essential services so that our citizens have a safety net in a time of crisis. This past year, that work was more important than ever. And it's a tragedy and a disgrace that these workers have been denied the same safety net that they provide for others. Public employees deserve our thanks, but more importantly, they deserve a safe working environment. I can only imagine how much worse the situation would have been in Connecticut if one of our local A&R had not led a campaign addressing sick buildings a decade ago. Without that effort, those buildings might still have been in operation, and the result would have been even more disastrous. Yet that success has been the exception to the rule. State buildings throughout our country have been allowed to fall into disrepair, especially with our HVAC systems. This byproduct of austerity budgets endangers public workers and the communities they serve. I know of state employees in Maryland who wear gloves to work in the winter because their heating system doesn't work, and they work on the 6th floor of an office building. The HVAC unit are far from modern, and so the risks of exposure to a deadly virus are high. Our failure to invest in public services and in public buildings is having disastrous implications. And unfortunately, like our healthcare workers, public employees now find themselves under attack. I know in Connecticut, our state employees are negotiating in a climate more hostile than we have seen in over a decade. We spent more than a year fighting for our citizens during a global pandemic, protecting our social safety nets, and now we must continue to protect ourselves and our livelihood at the bargaining table. Our public employee division members will need to stand together and get through this lengthy emotional process. So, like we do at all of our worker memorials, I will close with a quote that Randy already mentioned from Mother Jones. We must mourn for the dead, but continue to fight like hell for the living. Sisters and brothers, we will keep fighting, and I thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much, Jan. And thank you for all the work that you do. And thank you for lifting up our members and the work that they do and putting a face on who our public employees are, and who our nurses are, and who our healthcare workers are, and who our techs are, and who our educators are. Thank you. And one of the other people who do this in terms of making sure people know who our healthcare workers are. I don't think, Debbie, when you became president of HPAE about a couple of years ago, you know, you've worked as a union leader, you've worked as a registered nurse. I think you were a registered nurse for 27 years at Virtua Memorial Hospital. You are a long-term med-surg nurse. I don't think that you had a clue what this year was going to be. And COVID hit New Jersey hard. And Debbie White and HPAE were there every single day on the front lines in hospitals all across New Jersey with employers who were frankly terrible in terms of what they did. I'll never forget, Debbie, that sign while we were on strike in one of the Hackensack Meridian hospitals. That big sign had said, "Honor our heroes, our nurses, our doctors," and there were the nurses standing outside walking the picket line because of how terrible the hospital had been to them during COVID. You became a union rep in 1996. You've been on the negotiation. You've been basically doing every single job that we do in our unions. And you're now an AFT vice president, president of HPAE, and you're going to talk about HPAE's Day of Action. Well, you're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about, but I hope that you also lift up HPAE's Day of Action and the OSHA work. And also, what has it been like in terms of our members in New Jersey, particularly our clinicians and our nurses?
Thank you, Randy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Exactly 1 year ago today, we were in the midst of the worst unmitigated disaster to ever hit the state of New Jersey. By this time last year, our hospitals were overrun already. Healthcare workers were struggling to handle the enormous burden of the pandemic and the large crowds of patients that we saw. By this time last year, we had already lost 4 of our members to workplace-acquired COVID infections. And over the next year, we would lose 3 more. I just want to take a moment to recognize these 7 precious workers. Alfredo Pavital, a transport worker, died on March 26th of last year. Maria Luisa Lopez, a registered nurse, died on March 31st of last year. Susan Sakala, a registered nurse from the prisons, died on April 4th of last year. Nagi Abraham, a lab tech, died on April 12th. George Cisnero, a registered nurse, died on May 24th. Nancy Martel, a patient care tech, and also a beloved vice president, died after a long battle with this disease on July 12th of last year. And finally, and most recently, we have lost another member to COVID, and that would be Cecilia Pasquale, an RN, who died on April 15th of this year. And to those families and friends of these beloved members, we express our heartfelt condolences. We will be wearing black ribbons across the state in honor of these lives. The stage for this disaster was set long before the pandemic hit, and I think you said that already, Randy. There was no pandemic plan at the federal, state, or local level. So our hospitals and long-term care facilities were given the authority to handle the pandemic response, whatever way they saw fit. Some employers did well, but the majority failed their staff. Many of our healthcare facilities responded in a way that left their employees, our healthcare workers, our frontline caregivers, completely exposed and at risk of contracting COVID. In the midst of the first surge to hit the United States, our union, HPAE, we surveyed our members. What we found was alarming. A majority of those who responded told us they provided direct patient care to COVID-19 patients without appropriate personal protective equipment. 1 in 5 was infected. Think about this. Our healthcare workers, those given charge of the sickest members of society, lived in a constant state of terror. They knew they were unprotected, but they were still expected to go to work. PPE was rationed and locked away at times in closets, then provided in a haphazard way. Healthcare workers were instructed to take off masks so as not to scare patients. They were provided with ill-fitting protective gear, told to clean PPE with toxic chemicals and reuse it until, and I quote, until it was torn and falling off their faces. They were even provided with counterfeit respirators, which we know, of course, do not protect. Every day they'd go to work wondering, will I too contract COVID? Will I transmit this to my family? Will I make it through this pandemic alive? Sadly, our healthcare workers' fears were not far off the mark. Many contracted COVID, some with long-lasting side effects, and some died. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact number of healthcare workers affected because, outrageous as it seems, no one mandated that facilities track and report this information. It then makes sense that the adjective that most often healthcare workers used to describe how they felt during this time was disposable. They said, we felt disposable. As a union, we took action. We kept in constant contact with our members, keeping them educated and informed. We filed grievances, negotiated agreements, lobbied for legislation, and we were successful in New Jersey. We were the most outspoken advocates for healthcare workers in our state, and we filed more than 25 separate OSHA complaints, resulting in 25 employer citations. OSHA agreed with us. Hospitals and long-term care employers in New Jersey violated worker safety laws. We are not so focused on the fines OSHA has imposed, although they have been imposed. Instead, we look for the plan of correction mandated in each citation that will provide healthcare workers with a safer work environment, and we have seen some positive changes. We continue to fight for legislation and contract language mandating pandemic planning because why? We can't ever let this happen again. We must learn from our mistakes because it's only by review of the past that we can course correct for the future. We owe it to our healthcare workers, to our communities, and to our patients because if our healthcare workers are not safe, neither are their patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you for all the work you and HPAE have done in terms of this fight. And, you know, OSHA was, as I said, missing in action for most of the Trump administration. But what you filed, you didn't give up, and they had to act. And we now have some basis for what further actions they need to do. And thank you for never, ever, ever giving up. The last person who's actually giving a testimonial today on behalf of our members is someone from Detroit. And that's Terence Morton. He's also an AFT vice president, president of Detroit Federation of Teachers. Terence started as a second grade teacher at John Lynch Elementary on the east side of Detroit, where he then became a building rep. His activism led him to become the elected treasurer of the DFT and then its president. And Terence grew up in this union at the time when Betsy DeVos was doing everything she could to get rid of public education in Detroit. We all know the stories of Detroit and of Flint, but the same emergency manager who made the decision to basically poison the water in Flint was the emergency manager in Detroit when Terence was a building rep and the treasurer, fighting like you know what to make sure our kids had the kind of conditions they needed, which they didn't in virtually every school, and fighting for those kind of conditions for educators, paraprofessionals. And during COVID has hit Michigan over and over and over again, including the variants now. And I just want to turn it over to Terence to talk a little bit about what it's been like for the educators and sports staff and our communities in Detroit over this year.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you all for joining this call. One of the things that I'm certainly reminded of as we talk about COVID is really the sacrifices that have been made by all of us during this tough time. I can tell you that here in Detroit, while many of DFT members now have choice on whether or not they want to work face-to-face or work virtually, my heart goes out to those who don't have choice. Our brother and sister locals, particularly our paraprofessionals, who since the mandatory closure by the governor in March of 20 have been forced to go to work each and every day. And when you talk about sacrifice, these are really the individuals that have made the ultimate sacrifice. At the beginning of this pandemic, where none of us knew exactly what we were dealing with, where there was a level of uncertainty that ravaged through our community. When you talk about Detroit, you talk about one of the poorest and blackest cities in America, and to see your loved ones, people you work with, people who you are in your family, and folks that you love and care for, become sick, and some even die of this virus that we knew very little about. It was our paraprofessionals, those individuals who work in lunchrooms, serving food to children. They were called and they were asked to now go from serving food to children to serving food to communities all across this city, feeding thousands and thousands of families every day, where food deserts were very, very real across this city. Very little PPE. These individuals made the ultimate sacrifice and were there each and every day for the city of Detroit. And I just want to start this off by really commending them for making that ultimate sacrifice. And these aren't individuals who are paid a high salary. These are individuals who have the love and care for children and for the city in mind, and do this really as a sacrifice for our city and for our school district. As many of you know, the state of Michigan has been hit probably harder than most states across this country as a result of COVID. And having conversations with members over the past year and a half have been some of the toughest times for us all. From going from teaching your students every day to now teaching virtually, this was a huge adjustment for our membership. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the way that our members responded to this virus. It was a seamless transition for our members to go from face-to-face instruction to virtual instruction with very little guidance, very little time, but they knew that because they loved their students, we had to provide some semblance of education to our students. And they did it, and did it in extraordinary fashion. We had many of our members who not only taught virtually each and every day, but they also made drive-by visits to students' homes during some tough times, making phone calls, doing wellness checks, providing food, providing clothing to families that were in need. And these are individuals who went above and beyond what they were asked and called to do, and moving past simply educating students to really caring for families in a way that it was substantial for them and for their existence. As we move through this COVID space, it was important for us to ensure that once we went back to school, that the necessary mitigation strategies were in place at our school buildings to protect not only our teachers, but also to protect our students and our families. So we worked directly with the school district in ensuring that our buildings were up to code, that we had proper PPE for our teachers, that there was testing for all who wanted testing, that proper social distancing measures were in place, that we had the necessary things to keep people safe and to keep people healthy. This is proven to be an ongoing challenge for all of us. But as we work through this, I'm constantly reminded of the tremendous sacrifices that all of our folks have made in this environment, and the real guidance really that's coming from the membership, coming from the community, to really guide and move our district in a direction to ensure health, to ensure safety, and to make sure that our students are cared for.
Thank you so much, Terence. And part of what in the next couple of weeks we're going to do is we're in the middle of doing some work with parents across the country in conjunction with LULAC and NAACP and other parent groups to really see what we can do together to make sure that the fall is back to school for all of us in a safe and in-person way, and what our parents need and what they need and what our members need in order to make sure that school is a place that where people thrive. And I know that you're going to be part and parcel of all of that work. And thank you for all the work that you've done with assisting in terms of food and internet and all these things this year, which frankly so many of our locals have done. I'm going to Houston next week to be part of their food distributions centers that they've done with the community. New York City, so many others have done that as well, as has so many of our healthcare locals. This is when we say all in, as we remember the people we have loved and lost. We have been all in during this period of time. Are you two up for a couple of questions from our audience? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Jan had something she had to do, so she's not with us anymore, but she's with us in spirit. The first question, since we talked to the CDC today, I will take, but I would, if you two have other responses to it, totally want to hear that. And this question was on the variants. And the question went, there are a lot new variants going around. And with more and more people getting vaccinated, there's a question, obviously, about how the variants and the vaccines interact. And the specific questions were, will the vaccine protect me from the variants? Or are these, and will these variants further delay in-person reopening? I think that we have a case in point in which they do in Detroit, which Terence will talk about. But in general, it's what the CDC said today, which surprised pleasantly Kelly and myself, but we were really enthused by their answer. They were very bullish today about COVID being in the rearview mirror. They believe that of the variants that are in the United States right now, and they went through the various different ones, each of the vaccines are effective against the variants. Have they actually, gone through the testing the way they went through the testing for the first COVID virus that was in the United States? No, but they've now seen enough examples to know that the vaccines stop some of the worst illness from each of the variants, including the one that's most prolific in the United States, which is the Great Britain variant. And we're also seeing, while we're seeing in Michigan high numbers, we're seeing in other places, which is one of the reasons why they felt they could do this new relaxation of mask requirements outside. We're seeing numbers go down in a bunch of places. But the question about will it delay in person, our view is that we need to get our kids, vaccinated. For those who can, 16, 17, and 18 with the Pfizer vaccine. Chicago is the first place. Chicago and LA have actually worked with their districts to try to make sure that families, including children or younger or, less younger adults, meaning, or more younger adults, the 16, our high school kids, can have access to the vaccines. But ultimately, we're going to start the school year next year with layered mitigation and these other kind of safeguards, because all of our kids are not going to be vaccinated by September and October. But we believe that those layered mitigations in the main, plus testing, plus the access to vaccines that adults have had, are going to create the kind of safeguards that we need. And we believe that there's going to be a very robust opening in September. The last thing I will say, and then I'm just going to turn it over to Terence, is that the safety committees that many of you have done, that's been the glue that's made things safe. Yes, the science is there, but if we don't actually have the kind of negotiations that Debbie talked about in terms of having safety provisions in our contracts. And if we don't have the collaboration on the ground, like we saw in White Plains and in Meriden, Connecticut, in terms of, and Washington, D.C., in terms of people working together in a school to make sure PPE is there, or in a hospital, make sure PPE is there, to make sure that the other protocols are met, then it doesn't matter what's written on paper. Terence.
Yeah, Randy, I think, one of the things that we've seen here in the state of Michigan is when we had our rise in cases about a month and a half ago, the healthcare experts believe that a huge part of that was an influx of the variants that we've experienced here in the state of Michigan. It's really why that drove up a lot of the case numbers. And I think one of the things that has really helped us here in Detroit is having very strong contract language that spell out the terms and conditions of what reopening looks like. It's not just the mitigation strategies, but also really looking at the positivity rates and what percentage of positivity rates are going to trigger a opening or a closing of schools. And we were able to agree with the district on language such as that, which has really proven to provide the community, our teachers and our families of the real security that we are doing all that we can to keep folks safe in schools. It's very, very difficult to get the buy-in from the community if you don't have those mitigation strategies in place, if you cannot articulate what we're actually looking for and what's going to trigger an opening or a closing, what safety looks like, then it's going to be difficult for people to believe in that. We're very, very happy and proud of all the work that our state Fed has done in ensuring, and our governor, in ensuring that teachers were on the priority list, at the top of the priority list when it comes to getting the vaccine. We were eligible to be vaccinated very early in the year in January, and we were able to get a lot of our members the vaccine very, very early to help to mitigate the rise in numbers.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Debbie this question. So we got a former union leader who's the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh. What would you hope this means in terms of labor policy, in terms of workplace safety and other labor policy?
Oh, clearly, Randy, we need an OSHA standard. We need more restrictions on employers for, in terms of unionizing and those campaigns that are activated once we're organizing. It would be great to have a not only a standard so that we can have exactly like, OSHA cited our employers respiratory protections and the general duty clause as well. However, regarding our state, we did have a secret weapon in that we had an ex-safety specialist who knew exactly how to craft OSHA complaints, and so much so that she got the attention of our nearby OSHA region, and they listen. So, and it's hard to turn down a complaint when you've actually done all the investigation for that OSHA inspector. So, but we need clearly across the country, we need a standard. We need an OSHA standard, and history has shown us that we need it. And we also need a more union-friendly environment. There's no question about that.
So just FYI for everybody who's listening, just yesterday, and I don't know what's in it. We haven't seen it because it's going through the regulatory process. There's a lot of bureaucratic steps that frankly, I don't even understand. But the new Secretary of Labor has moved the emergency standard. So there's still a process. It's moving. It's going through that process, whatever that process is. But we were told that it has now been released through that process. And the other thing that they did is that there is now a task force led by the Vice President of the United States of America, co-chaired by the new Labor Secretary, about how to actually have more collective bargaining and more union density in America. That they take seriously that the National Labor Relations Act was about workers having power. It was not about how management could crush unions. It was about how workers have power, and workers have that kind of choice, real choice, not one that if you want a union, you're going to get fired, not one that after you've organized, you can never get to a first contract because the management won't negotiate in good faith. All of that stuff that we've tried to get into the new PRO Act, and I did a column about this in the New York Times this weekend. All of that is also separate and apart from trying to get the PRO Act passed. They're trying to figure out what kind of policy they can do to actually foster more unionization and more collective bargaining.
Fantastic.
So that's the news flash from this week. The rest of it, we got to wait for Joe Biden to do a speech tomorrow night. There's one last question. That's a tricky one. I'm going to ask all of us to try to answer it, which is, the issue about vaccines and whether or not they should be mandatory. And this is tricky because we've just done a poll of our own members who are really split about it, about half and half. Half think that they should be mandatory, half think that they shouldn't. So the question is, other vaccines are mandatory for, kids. Should this one be mandatory? And should it be mandatory for kids? Should it be mandatory for employees? And I promise this is just, I want your opinion, and then I'll give mine as well. But this is a tricky one, and I wanted all of us to answer it.
Yeah, Randy, it certainly is a tricky question. One of the things that I have tried to be consistent on is really looking at this from a personal choice perspective. Vaccine is right now our personal choices for folks who want to get them. It should be very easy for them to get them and convenient for them to get a vaccine. For those folks who are on the fence, we certainly want to provide as much education as possible for them so that they can make a choice that best fits them and best fits their family. And then we also want to respect the fact that there are some individuals who are against being vaccinated. And I can certainly understand that. Look, when you talk about cities like Detroit with large populations of Black and brown people, there is a uncertainty and a distrust in government and in medicine that stems from years and years of mistreatment. And so you can understand why folks take the position that they take in not wanting to get the vaccine. And so at some point, we certainly, America has to come to grips with that and figure out how we make how it makes amends to Black people and to brown people in some form or fashion. But what we've done here in Detroit is we've certainly provided incentives for our members to take the vaccine, working with the school district, providing an opportunity for our teachers to get the vaccine during the regular work day, and to also be compensated for getting the vaccine. which was very, very tough. But we were able to do it, and we were able to get it done with the school district. But I support personal choice for all folks. And that's kind of where I stand at this point.
Thank you, Terence. Debbie.
I agree with you. There is still quite a bit of vaccine hesitancy out there. We're currently in emergency use authorization, so we can't mandate something in that stage. But do I see it looming on the horizon? I do. Do I support mandatory COVID vaccination? I'm not sure that I support it yet. Let me just say, for me, I feel much safer having been vaccinated. I truly do. There is a great need for education. And I also think that we should have exemptions for those who may need it, whether it be a medical exemption or a religious exemption. But I see, at least for healthcare, and I'm not, I could be wrong about this, but I see it looming on the horizon. I think we can achieve herd immunity only through people getting the disease or being vaccinated. Those are our choices. And I would hate to get COVID. I would much rather be vaccinated. I don't know if I danced around the subject enough, but I think I did that pretty well.
It was good. And I think, look, I think you're hearing in all of us, because I would basically have answered it the same way as both of you, which is, look, I believe personally in 100% vaccination. That's my personal belief, but I can't impose my personal belief on others. I think you're right, Terence, particularly at this moment. And I think Debbie just said it right. We're in emergency. The FDA approved it in terms of emergency use. With every passing day, there's more evidence, and I do appreciate the fact that FDA and CDC took a pause of J&J to show people that they were really serious on trying to figure out what was going on with, even though it was 1 in a million, that blood clot issue was they thought it was a real issue, and they really studied it. And that shows us that we actually have scientists who believe in safety at the head of these agencies now. And so during this period of time, until all of the emergency use is done, until we really have something that's safe and effective for everyone, it's very hard to say that something should be mandatory. I see it on the horizon too. I know that, people are saying to us in terms of as a workplace, I'm not sure I want to be comfortable. Sorry about my dog. She's saying it's time to get off. I'm not sure I want to be comfortable. One second. Sorry, we're both doing big Zooms today. So, I think we will be wrestling with this in a year from now. And I think, like other vaccines, we're going to be wrestling with that in a year from now. But I think we have to do our utmost to actually do the education campaigns that both of you have talked about, and that for this moment, we have to actually make this volitional, not mandatory, and do the work we have to do to actually try to convince people that it is all of our patriotic duty to get a vaccine, but we have to meet fear with facts. So I don't know. I think we all did a really good job at this question, and we're very honest about it. So thank you. So let me just say to Terence, let me just see if either one of you have last words, and then we're going to sign off and say thank you to everybody.
Yeah, just wanted to add in terms of the vaccine question. I think one of the things it's so important is to really hear the voices of the workers, hear the voices of community folks when it comes to vaccines and why there's so much hesitancy. Really taking the time to really fish that out and prepare for to address it. And to get folks to a level of being comfortable with it. And I think one of the last things that I will say is that during this pandemic, it has certainly taught us some things and helped to reveal other things that we may have already known. I think one of the things that we can say is that our education system certainly wasn't perfect, and it did not work for everybody. And I think we've seen that throughout this pandemic. But what I also think that it is shown is the importance of labor unions through this pandemic. We have proven to be some of the last lines of defense in our communities. Students, families look to us for guidance in many of these instances, and this pandemic has been no different. And what I would certainly like to see is really a resurgence and an expansion of places that we don't have unions to actually have unions for workers. While we fight extremely hard for mitigation strategies in our workplaces, there are individuals who work hard who don't have that same option. And I hope that brings about, as you talked about earlier, Randy, more union density across this country, because it's certainly needed, and is one of the things that this pandemic has really shown us.
Thank you, Terence. Debbie, last words.
I agree 100% with Terence. HPAE was the absolute loudest voice in our state. We were the union alike. And I have to say, I'm really hoping for a lot of organizing in the future.
Look, together, what we have always known as our union is together we can accomplish what's impossible to do alone. And we see that with DFT. We see that with HPAE. We see that with these two tremendous leaders and with Jan Hockadell, who has joined us earlier. And nowhere is that more consequential when we have life and death facing us as we've had in the whole last year, and all of the chaos and the turmoil and the havoc that has happened to our families and our communities, both those we represent and those we serve. So as we look forward, as we fight for the American Rescue Plan and fight for jobs policy and for families and for all the things we're fighting for, HR 1 and the PRO Act and, the emergency standard and, schools that parents want to send their kids to and educators want to work in and where kids thrive, and hospitals where it's about people, not profits. And as we do all the fights that we do, it was important today to remember those we loved and lost, those on the front lines. Our members did everything in their power to help others. And so I just really want to say thank you to both of you, Terence and to Debbie, for helping us honor those who we've loved and lost. And I want to make sure that everybody remembers tomorrow, Workers' Memorial Day, and please share your stories tomorrow. We'll be doing a Facebook Live in the middle of the day, honoring, like we did tonight, our members who we loved and lost. And as we mourn them, we fight like hell for the living. Tomorrow's Workers' Memorial Day. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you all soon. Be safe.
Thank you.